This lesson is going to provide an overview of what occurs during the birthing process. So, simple learning objective for today's lesson is to describe the 3 stages of labour, and our key words associated with those 3 stages can be found here. So, when we look at birth, there are 3 stages as we've mentioned, and there's some key words that you need to understand. So the first one is gestation. And gestation is the period of development through which the fetus, human fetus in this case, is developing inside the uterus. It is typically classed as the time between conception and birth. So that's right from being a zygote to being born. Parturition isn't a term that's commonly used, but if you see it in an exam or a test, it describes the process of birth itself, and that encompasses all 3 stages. And then finally, labour. This is the sequence of events that precede birth, so right before birth, and it results in the expulsion of the fetus, typically through the vagina. Now, if you ever wanted to know what birth feels like, lucky for you, there are pain simulators that you can have a go at if you feel like it or not. Okay, so when we start looking at parturition, we're looking at what occurs inside the female body first of all. So you can see that the uterus has enlarged a great deal because, remember, it's made of muscle, so therefore it's able to stretch. The fetus is orientated in the correct way, the head is pointing downwards, and it's settling a little deeper inside the mother's pelvis. You can see that the placenta is attached onto the wall of the uterus here, and we can see that where the orientation of all the other organs, so we can see the bladder down here, and the vagina, which will become the birth canal, and the cervix. Now, things that start to happen here, we will start to get small contractions of the uterus, and this is the start of labour pains, and sometimes that is called Braxton Hicks. There will be some hormonal changes that occur. So 2 hormones that you really need to know about are relaxin. This hormone will soften the ligaments at the pelvis, and it will help to loosen joints. You also have oxytocin, and this strengthens the contractions of the uterus. So oxytocin will make the muscles in the uterus contract stronger and stronger to force the baby out, while relaxin will soften the joints at the pelvis to help them move apart slightly so that the fetus has an easier birthing process. In addition to that, the cervix here will soften and it will shorten. That means it will thin out and dilate. So it gets thinner and wider, and it starts to open up. Okay, so first stage is that labour has commenced. Of course, there'll be contractions and they'll start to get stronger, which means that they will start to become not only more forceful but regular in their timing. The mucus plug that builds up to prevent any bacterial infection will start to soften, and it will be passed out through the vagina. With that, you may get rupturing of the amniotic sac. It could be a trickle, it could be a whole gush of liquid. Women experience different things, but the rupturing of the amniotic sac is a very clear stage that labour has begun. Okay, so just to give you an overview, we have 3 stages of labour as we talked about at the start. So we have the first one, which is the dilation of the cervix. We have the expulsion of the fetus, and then we have the afterbirth. So let's look at the first stage. Now, dilation of the cervix is typically the longest stage and can last for hours. So we have waves of contraction from the uterus right down to the vagina that start to become stronger. They become longer and closer together, and these are what causes the pain that females experience during that process. as the cervix widens and shortens, this is called effacement, the cervix and the vagina form one single passage, and this is known as the birth canal. So the vagina is not the birth canal itself, it's the vagina and the cervix, because the cervix widens and shortens. When the cervix is fully dilated, we're looking at it opening up to 10 centimeters. So that's a 20% increase in diameter. Okay, so during effacement, you can see here that the cervix up here and the vagina down here, you can see that the cervix starts to dilate, and it's fully dilated, which you can see here. And you can see that the cervix starts to thin, and it will become a tube in line with the vagina, forming the birth canal. Here we're just looking at ways that the fetus is monitored during birth, just to make sure there's no fetal distress. There are a number of ways that can happen. So they can put in a catheter to monitor the internal contractions. They can put in a fetal scalp electrode to monitor the heart rate of the fetus. There are lots of devices that can be done to ensure that the emerging baby is safe during the process. Okay, the second stage of labour is expulsion. And here the fetus head will start to stretch the vagina, and it will mould to the shape of the birth canal. And the reason why it's able to do this is due to the fontanelles. So these are the soft spots on the baby's head where the bones have not formed. So those bones will start to overlap slightly, and you can see part of the fontanelles there. And when those bones overlap, it makes it a little bit easier for the baby's head to leave and push through the birth canal. Now, this process itself of the fetus crowning will stimulate the mother to voluntarily push and these muscles will contract, forcing the baby further out. Now, along with this voluntary need to contract, there are also involuntary contractions from the uterine muscle. Remember that hormone oxytocin is sending messages to that uterus muscle to contract, and this also helps to force the fetus out. So during the vaginal entrance, tissue surrounding the vagina will help the baby to emerge. Now the baby is facing downwards, and you can see that here and here, and its head acts like a wedge to keep the cervix open, and it allows the baby to start breathing before it completely leaves the birth canal. Now as the baby emerges, it will start to rotate sideways, and therefore it allows the shoulders and the abdomen to emerge much more easily. Okay, so when the baby is born, you can see in this picture here, it tends to be coated in this kind of white, creamy, waxy type stuff, and this is called the vernix. They used to wash the baby completely clean when the baby was born immediately after, and they thought that was a good thing to get rid of all the waste materials. However, they've since realised that the vernix is a special material that offers protection to the baby against skin infections. So nowadays the vernix is left on, and it just naturally comes away after about a week. Okay, so the third stage of labour is the afterbirth. So once the physical baby has left the uterus, the placenta is still attached onto that uterine wall. So the baby is connected to the umbilical cord, and it's external of the uterus. So what happens is the umbilical cord is clamped in two places, and then it's cut, and the uterus will continue to contract. Now, anywhere between 5 minutes and half an hour, the chorion, amnion, and the placenta will be expelled. So the blood vessels that were supplying the placenta will contract, so there's no major blood loss there, but the placenta can't just be surgically removed under natural circumstances. It will just unattach naturally. Okay, so here we can see the umbilical cord. So remembering we've got two umbilical arteries and one umbilical vein. You can see on this baby here, you can see that creamy white stuff is the vernix, and you can see the clamping of the cord in two places, and they're cutting the cord there. Now, with newborns, they tend to be quite small, obviously about 50 centimetres in length, although that may vary. The head does take up a large proportion of the baby, and this is because of the brain size. The average weight is about 3,300 grams, although, again, this does vary with different children, although male children tend to be slightly bigger proportions than females. Now again, you can see the fontanelles in blue here. These are the areas where the cranium hasn't quite sealed into one structure. That will take time to happen. So after birth, the fontanelles will settle back and the baby's head goes back into normal shape. Now, when a baby is born, of course, they're flailing all over the place, and the reason for that is because their muscle control hasn't developed, because their brains are very immature. So that's why they have the floppy head that rolls around and the legs that kind of splay out in all sides. Now, although they do look quite helpless, babies are able to breathe, suck and swallow and remove waste themselves. So they're not completely helpless, and they do have innate reflexes, so inbuilt unthinking reflexes that help the baby to stay alive. The most common is the grasp or Palmer reflex that all babies have at birth. Okay, so now that we've talked about the 3 stages of birth, please make sure that you read pages 318 to 320 in your textbook and answer the questions on page 29 to 30 of your booklet.